Welcome to the Maintainable Software Podcast, where we explore the art of improving existing software with seasoned practitioners who have helped organizations overcome the problems often associated with technical debt and legacy code. I'm your host, Robby Russell. On this episode, Katerina Scroumpelou joins us, who is currently a senior engineer / product advocate at NX. Katerina joins us from Athens, Greece. Katerina Scroumpelou, welcome to Maintainable.
It's very nice to be here, Robby. Thank you for inviting me.
For a fun little fact, Katerina and I just met a couple weeks ago in Boston, SquiggleConf, where we were both participating. I believe you were hosting a workshop there. How did that go?
Yes, I enjoyed it very much. I really like workshops because I really like to act like a teacher, you know. It makes me feel so powerful over the students.
We got to talking when we were out on one of the morning runs. I think we did a 5K together with a couple of the other, some of the organizers and other participants, and that was a fun conversation. And then you had to run off to your workshop, so I was curious to hear how that went. So with that, all right, let's get to it. So as you reflect on your experience in the industry, what do you believe are a few common characteristics of, dare I say, well-maintained software?
That's a great question. I think one of the main things is that the code is easy to read and understand, right? You have a clear code structure and solid documentation. These are the things that I also try to do in my code, or when I hand over code to someone else, I really strive for it to be clear and understandable. Also, it's scalable. So whatever you make, just make sure you can scale it. You can add modules, you have small libraries so that it can scale easily. And if it's scalable in an easy way, then it can be maintained in an easy way as well. That's how I have it in my head. And also it's reliable. So there's no flakiness, no weird crashes. And also it's trying to use as close to as latest versions of the version of the software that it's using as possible. I know it's not always possible to keep up with the latest version, but at least the updates should come in a maintained way.
I'm curious, one of the things you mentioned there was related to, say, clear documentation, and I wonder sometimes if that can be very subjective based off of everybody learns differently or can kind of wrap their head around a piece of technology or a piece of software. Some people really, can read a book. Some people struggle with reading books about learning how to program. And so like when it comes to documentation, I found a good balance there between what might work well for you, but also trying to resonate what works well for other types of people that learn or digest information in a different way.
Fair enough. What I try to do, or what I appreciate when I see being done, is so I do add some comments to my code, but the comments to my code will be concise. So it might be just 1 line or 2 line stops. But in the README, or in whatever corresponds as a README in each repository that you see, I try to be clear about what steps need to be followed in order to run or test the software. So not too lengthy sentences of what to do, just step 1, install dependencies. Step 2, run this command so that it runs. And just make sure that there are no loose ends, because what I mean by loose ends is looking through a code base and not understanding what is this thing doing here. So what I try to do is that. And even because lately I tend to do a lot of demos for our tool. So I do demos, I share them with clients or with potential users. What I try to do is just be very detailed, but also concise on the steps that need to be followed. I also link to some lengthier pieces of documentation that may be a blog post or something else. But just if someone wants to go there and get up and running and see how it works, just have 1, 2, 3 steps that people can follow.
I think that's a good segue into one of the other topics I wanted to discuss with you. So as a product advocate at NX, can you give us a sense of what your roles, and what does being a product advocate mean to you? And I'm kind of like maybe kind of describe that role for listeners who may not work in an environment where they have, say, a product advocate because maybe they're working on an internal piece of software, but they're kind of curious to learn more about this type of role.
Yeah, that's a great question, because I just had a meeting with my manager right before our podcast, and we were just discussing that because I had a talk with a friend who works at another company. We just had a meeting a couple of days ago, and I was telling them, oh, I just transitioned to being product advocate. And he said, we're doing product advocacy here as well. And I said, oh, cool, but I didn't think to ask them how they do it, because in my perception, I mean, when they suggested from my company that I become product advocate, I had no idea what it was, right? And in my perception, it's a new role that's being added into companies right now. And because a lot of startup companies or companies like ours that have a tool that a lot of users use, of course, they have a developer advocate, right? And the developer advocate, their role is pretty clear: documentation, go to conferences, or make sure that the documentation and the demos that we have are correct, etc. The product advocate may be working on a different level. And the way I see it is reach out to existing customers or users of our tool, make sure that the product is working well for them, and just understand if they could benefit from some different use of the products, some other version of the product, or if they want some guidance to make sure that they're making the most out of the product.
Hey folks, it's me, Robby. I want you to take a moment and close your eyes. Now picture your code and your applications as a symphony. Now to keep that symphony playing smoothly, you need an orchestra of tools. That's where our podcast sponsor, AppSignal, takes center stage. They combine the elegance of error tracking, the precision of performance monitoring, and the harmony of logging into one symphonic suite. Whether you're composing with Ruby, jamming with Elixir, orchestrating with Node.js, or harmonizing with Python, or maybe even a little bit of flourish of JavaScript, AppSignal's got the sheet music for you. And here's the crescendo. Plans start at just $23 US a month. That's gotta be music to your budget's ears. Plus they're certified ISO 27001 and they dance the GDPR and HIPAA compliance beats. So don't miss a beat, my friends. Head on over to appsignal.com and tell them that your good friend Robby from Maintainable sent you. Now, open your eyes and let the symphony of smooth coding begin. Let's get back to our show. Does your organization have a concept of a product owner, and where's the kind of delineation between that in terms of like doing, say, customer research for potentially new features, or you're not necessarily going in there to, are you training your existing customers on how to take advantage of the product? And, you know, where's that delineation between a product owner, or like at least what I would consider a product owner, and maybe that developer advocate role that you mentioned there as well? It sounds interesting.
So from my understanding, the main difference is that I was working as an engineer on an X for 4 years and a few months until I transitioned to product advocate. I think the way I am approaching the customers is more technical, in the sense that let's get hands-on on your code. Show me your configuration. Let's see what you can change and how it can help you on a more technical level. Get the most out of it. Maybe this is the distinction that we are doing, that are more in the field, getting technical with the customers, and not on a more elevated level, maybe of, I don't know, more outside perspective.
And it's kind of like a white glove service of like, we're going to get in there, we're going to get in the code or the configuration, we're going to like up our sleeves and like help you get integrated and take advantage of our tooling to the best of your ability for that team, rather than being like, just read the documentation and let us know if you have a problem and we'll just provide support. You're actually like helping them.
Exactly. And we do use the term white glove, and the term white glove, okay. I just learned this term like a month ago. So yeah. I always learn new English terms. I'm not a native speaker, so it's exciting for me.
I'm glad that I'm helping reinforce that. I don't think I use it that often in my day-to-day vocabulary, but I always think about that from like, I don't feel like I think about it in the software industry. So interesting to hear it getting used in the software industry. So that's I appreciate that. So with that, you know, you talked about some of the things you're doing. So what does a typical, say, week look like for you in this new role, and what's been most surprising to you so far since transition from engineer?
So I think the thing I missed most when being just an engineer was connecting with people. And I would do that on my own, either on my spare time or some company time, by going to conferences and speaking to events or engaging with people on GitHub, right? Because and I work from home like most people do, but I really crave the interaction and getting there, being excited, talking with people. So this role does give me this way to do exactly that. So a typical week would look like I have 1 or 2 meetings daily where I sit down with a customer and see an issue they may be facing or trying to see how to help them. And in the same time, because it's a new role for a company as well, I may be doing some documentation on how the process works for me, because I also really like writing down things. So this is also a nice thing that I get to do. So a typical week would look like this. Or for example, today I had a customer that had an issue with their micro front end setup. They sent me a demo, so I just sat down, tried to reproduce their issue, and tried to find a solution for them, for example.
I'm curious. It's not also, to be fair, you'd also mentioned that you had spoken earlier today with your manager about the role and things. So this is still an evolving thing for you, it sounds like. And so
Yes,
maybe we'll report back later once we learn a little bit more from you and see how it's
sure,
going.
of course.
So I'm curious, getting into some of our typical maintainable podcast topics. Like, what is your current take on the metaphor technical debt? Do you use it in your day-to-day work with working with customers or with your internal engineering teams?
We don't use it as much. I think there may be some technical debt on the NX code base. Maybe we usually add that to do in there. But for example, when I was working for a customer that had like this huge code base with thousands of developers, like a big corporation. In these cases that I have worked with such large customers, the term technical debt is more apparent to me. Because if a code base is quite old and front-end technologies change a lot rapidly. For example, you may have a setup that works for you, but then some new tools come up or some new versions come up and you don't catch up, as I said. Like it's not always easy to make sure you're on the latest version or you're keeping up with the best practices. So in my mind, and some of these things, they may work well, some old versions, but some old versions also may have some security vulnerabilities or some performance issues that can only be improved if you update or if you change some small things in your architecture, for example. So I think this is how I would define the term technical debt. That's because a code base is very big, it's not easy if you're working on new features mostly or just fixing bugs. It's not easy to just sit there and plan. This month, we're just upgrading our code base. So it's not easy for a large corporation to allocate that time. So one way or another, you end up doing following some practices that are not the best, but you're also in a trap that you cannot really escape them.
Have you worked with many customers maybe that have been able to kind of overcome those challenges, or is that tend to be just that's just something that a lot of customers just seem to have to deal with?
Oh no, I have seen customers overcome this challenge. Yes, the thing is that you can do it. What I have seen is that they do it incrementally, right? And if their architecture supports that, I mean, if the architecture is to break things down into smaller modules or smaller libraries, then they are given the chance to maybe do this incrementally.
I want to pivot the topics a little bit. And one of the things, while preparing for the discussion, you mentioned that you were involved in a project where you're migrating a large database from Firebase real-time to Firestore. Could you the challenges that you encountered during and how you would maybe reapproach it next time?
Definitely. So that was in my previous job, like 5 years ago, 5.5 years ago. I was working with a customer. It was a small startup and they had all their data in real-time database. And I think there were two reasons we wanted to migrate to Firestore. First, because the real-time database is not Firebase suggests that people use Firestore because it's faster, because it's more scalable, and because you can do a lot more things with Firestore, get more sophisticated with queries than the real-time database. And the real-time database, they were saying that it was going to get deprecated, or in general, it's not the suggested way to go. So because they were at the stage where they were scaling, I thought, okay, if we're going to scale, let's migrate all the data from real-time database to Firestore. That was a bold move. I want to make this clear. I don't know if I would suggest it to everyone because it's a bold move and it takes time. And when I got into this, because I was the only developer working on it, because as I said, it was a small startup, I don't know if I would want again to be the sole person responsible for all this, right? So while it worked out pretty good, it worked out well. And in fact, we were able to scale more and handle more complex queries and search and add security rules, because security rules were also very important. That with Firestore, you can get pretty sophisticated with imposing rules on the database. While it was a good move, it was also a scary move because you deal with the customer's data, and if something goes wrong, then we had a lot of backups, but still, it's an operation that it scared me sometimes.
Do you often find that a lot of those types of projects be maybe mentioned being by yourself on that, working by yourself on that project? And so there's a lot of things that account for. How do you think you would have approached it differently if you had someone else in that process to be kind of a partner on that, just to kind of help check in on things, or just be able to divide and conquer a little bit? Or I know a lot of developers that'll try to do some big mission by themselves, even if they're part of a larger team. Sometimes teams will send one person maybe that's a little bit more experienced or something they feel comfortable, like send them off on a solo mission to try to deal with a big upgrade or a migration or something, and then they go off by themselves for months trying to figure this thing out while the rest of the teams focus elsewhere. And then sometimes those projects don't get finished because that person gets burnt out, or a lot of other things can happen in that process, or they get pulled away, right? And so did you have a challenge? What do you think would be different now if you did have a different person, or can you think of anything you would do differently for yourself to think about how to use that sort of scenario?
Yeah, let me tell you. So in my first 2 or 3 jobs, anyway, in the first 4 years of my career, either in my first job or my second job or my third job, I was the only person working on X. Like on my first job, I was the only person working on front end. We had an Angular 1.4 application, I think it was back in the days, and I was the only person working on that. What is the bad thing about that? No code reviews, no pull requests, nothing. Second job, the same thing. I was in a big company working on a small team. It was like a startup within this company because it was this new product. Also, so there was a team that had 2 backend developers, myself, 1 QA, 1 tester, So again, I was the only one writing a React application that would talk with the backend. What is the bad thing about that? No code reviews, nothing to discuss how the application should be architectured, nothing, just myself taking decision. Third project as well, I was the only one doing the Firebase and everything. When I changed and I went on a job that I was actually working in a team, and there were pull requests and code reviews, that changed the way I write code, and that changed the way I think about software and code in general. Because first, you know that someone is going to look at your code line by line, and it might sound scary, but it's very educative. It's like in the first 3 months, I felt like I learned all the things I hadn't learned the past 4 years, right? Second, because you know that people are going to read the code, you're much more careful in writing clear code and documenting. And third, you're much more prepared to explain why you're taking some decisions. So I think this would be the difference. I don't know how it would change the specific migration, but I would definitely have someone who is on the same level and on the same mindset and on the same knowledge as myself, and try to discuss, do you think this is a good decision right now? Yes, no, how should we do it? Should we do it incrementally? Should we do it all by one? It's a huge jump in the career when you have someone to do your code.
We'll be back with our interview with Katerina in just a moment. Hi, it's me, Robby. I just wanted to take a quick moment to say thank you for making time to listen to the podcast. If you're finding these conversations valuable, please consider sharing a link amongst your peers and or writing a review on Apple Podcast or Spotify to help spread the word. Also, do you know someone you think I should have on the podcast? Shoot me an email to Robby with a Y at maintainable.fm and state your case. And now, let's get back to our interview with Katerina Skroumpelou. It's been a long time since I've worked by myself. I mean, I work on some small projects by myself at times, but I've always had other people around for the past 20 something years. So I forget what it's like to be. I remember my previous job, I was like one developer working on projects by myself. And I've had developers that joined those projects after I left that have told me your code wasn't that great. And I'm like, well, no one else was looking at it. And, like I didn't have any feedback cycles, or like, did you know you had this big security problem that you didn't even, like, no one would have told me. So things you kind of learn in hindsight. So no, thanks for kind of walking me through that. I think that's helpful to get some perspective there. I want to talk a little bit more about, your your product over there at NX, in particular around, maybe you could tell us a little bit about like what the primary product is there, because I know that it deals with, I believe, monorepos is kind of a big part of that.
Yes,
So
that is
like,
correct.
so what sort of problems is your software there solving for teams, and what kind of teams might, like people maybe listening might take advantage of, or maybe be curious about this sort of approach?
Yeah, so I think the main problem that our tool solves is scalability and maintaining a fast CI while scaling, I think is the main thing. But we're also working with smaller teams or smaller repositories. Our tagline is build system optimized for monorepos with plugins for popular frameworks and tools and advanced CI capabilities. What does this mean though? So we have there are two separate things that we have at NX. We have NX, which is the free open source CLI tool that you can use our CLI to generate code, generate your monorepo, generate applications, generate components, use the NX task runner locally to run your tasks. And the two things that you get with the NX, the CLI, the free open source CLI tool, is that you get cache. So whenever you run a task, the artifacts of that task are cached. So whenever you run the same task, it fetches the artifacts from the cache, right? And whenever you make a change in your code, NX analyzes your code. It analyzes your code's dependencies. And if you're working on a monorepo, you have an application and you have a lot of libraries that build up your application, right? So if you make a change to one library and you try to rebuild the application, NX will fetch all the artifacts from the libraries that had been built in previous steps and only rebuild the changed library, for example. So these are our two flagship things that we do, right? And you can get with them with the free open source tool that NX is, as well as the code generators. And we also take care of migrating your code automatically. So you would just write NX migrate, and it would make sure to update all your dependencies in the latest versions, but also do all the code modifications that are needed to get you up to date with the latest versions of the tools you're using. So this is why I said it really helps with scalability and maintainability as well, because we offer these automatic migrations for you.
To clarify on what do you mean by scalability? Is that in terms of primarily team size growth or scaling of the platform with spinning up more, or a bit of both?
A bit of both, I will say, because NX sort of imposes its own, not its own architecture, but because it has its own monorepo style, right? You have your monorepo, you have your packages in it, and NX helps you split your monorepo into smaller parts, smaller libraries, smaller components. So that's why I'm saying scalability, because you can add however many projects you want in the monorepo. So this helps scale the actual software, but it also helps if your team scales, because the ramp up is a lot easier if your code is broken up into smaller pieces that people can get on board and much quicker, right? Or they can only focus on a part of the code base and they don't need to learn the whole thing. So the other thing that we have is our cloud. And our cloud is, you can set it up with GitHub Actions, the NXCI, and you can write a script in GitHub Actions that will delegate the work to our NX Cloud. And what our cloud will do is that instead of the cache that it will offer you, if we're working together on the same monorepo, we can share the same cache. If I run a task, you can get the cache from my task, but also it will spin up different machines so that you can run tasks in parallel. So that if you have like 10 tests, you can run all the 10 tests in parallel, so that it's really, really fast in the end.
It's interesting. Does NX provide the tooling to help you migrate to monorepo, or is that kind of primarily
Yes.
work once you, okay, interesting. When do you think teams should consider a monorepo approach?
If you ask me, because I've been in this world for 4.5 years, I would say it's a no-brainer. Why not use a monorepo? Why not modularize your code and break it down into smaller parts that you can just easily reuse, and yeah, just have everything organized in smaller parts, each one in its own drawer, you know. So in my mind, it's a very good way to go.
Does it change in this sort of environments where maybe there's lots of different programming languages maybe getting used? How does that developer experience change? Do you have to have I mean, I'm a little ignorant about this particular area, so I'm just curious about if you have a bit of Elixir and Ruby and PHP in your because you have maybe teams that have broken things up into microservices, and if you go back, if you're maybe say go back, but if you're deciding I want to like kind of bring these all together into one monorepo approach, do the developers need to kind of have to have all of that stuff set up for their local environment to work, or can they kind of compartmentalize the certain areas that they're working on, and how does that kind of like play out?
You are correct in asking that. I did not specify that it's NX is mostly optimized for TypeScript or Node projects, right?
Okay.
Mainly for web. But we do have plugins for Gradle, for Java Gradle. So someone could have Gradle and TypeScript being whichever technology that uses JavaScript, for example, in the same monorepo. I would not know how to answer to the others, but I don't mind. I'm pretty good about accepting that I don't know things. But yeah, I don't know how it would work. Maybe if it's too complicated to set up, it's not even worth it, I would say.
I'm going to do some, if anyone's listening and has some information on this, I'd be curious to learn a little bit more and maybe come on the podcast. I think I've had one or two people previously, other previous guests that have, we've talked about monorepos. One of them worked at New Relic, and so I don't know what tooling that they were using there for kind of experimenting with that, but I'm not sure how that panned out for them either. But I want to kind of switch gears again with you, and I'm curious, Katerina, are there any new trends in software development? I don't know, like AI or other things that you think that are kind of coming our way that you're kind of interested in learning more about, or you've been kind of dabbling in that you think could help with the future of maintaining software?
Yes, in fact, I have been using quite a lot AI tools. I assume other people do so as well. So this new code AI tool came out about a month ago from the StackBlitz team, bold.new. And I want to say it is amazing. And why is it amazing? Because you can give it a prompt and it will actually work and give you a good ready-made application that you can actually also run and deploy from the web browser. And you can also run Node on your web browser. So I think this is quite revolutionary. And I want to give a shout out to that. And I think this pretty much changes the way we write software sometimes. Because, for example, I will admit this, in the past, while I was preparing for a conference and I wanted to create a demo application for a conference, I would spend like a week polishing the demo, making it nice. Now you can just use one of the AI tools, in this case, bold.new, and it will spin up a demo for you in minutes, and you can polish it within hours, for example. So I think this is amazing because it gives us a new tool that makes sort of the tedious tasks a lot faster, and you can focus on actually just the polishing of things and bringing them to the state that you want them to be.
What was the name of that tool again?
Bolt.new, I just...
Bolt done. Okay.
Yes.
I'll definitely include links to that. I have not actually heard of that one before, or if I did,
Yeah, it's from the StackBlitz team.
Okay.
StackBlitz is the online editor, and yeah.
Awesome. I'll definitely include links to that, and I'll go check that out myself. What types of applications have you kind of experimented with this so far? Is it kind of some simple CRUD-like forms listing of data type of situations, or
Yeah, or yeah, just a simple CRUD UI potentially, or if I've also tried with a Next application that also has the Next API, of course, that it's running. So it's amazing that you can actually also run Node in there and deploy it. But there is another amazing thing that this tool has, that, it's the slide dev, that you can create slides with HTML. So I used to do that in the past. I don't do it anymore because I find it a bit tiring. And it really gets in my head to do it perfectly. So I just say, okay, I'll just use Keynote and be done in an hour.
Same.
But with bold.new, you can also create the slides with slide dev. So I tried it the other day as I was preparing for a presentation, and it's perfect.
Awesome. Hey folks, it's Robby here. I want to take a moment to talk about my company, Planet Argon. Picture us as a wildcat sanctuary for your software projects, where those legacy applications can unleash their full potential. Whether you need a few extra claws on deck with staff augmentation, or a nimble team to pounce in with fractional development services, we're here to help your projects prowl with confidence. We specialize in taming technologies like Ruby on Rails, React, and Laravel. So if you know of a company with software that's feeling a bit like a feral feline, struggling with technical debt, legacy code, or just needs to sharpen its claws with new features, send them our way. We'll help them roar back to life. Check us out at planetargon.com. That's planetargon.com. All right, let's get back to the show. Stay fierce. Meow. For those listening that couldn't see that, she just did that chef's kiss over our video chat. So, all right, I'm going to have to check that out. I'm not sure if I'm ready to start going back to making my slides in HTML again, but I don't know why people like to hurt themselves like that.
Yeah.
So a couple of quick last questions for you, Katerina. I like to ask questions, this particular question, a lot of people, and this is more of a general getting advice from you. So let's imagine that there's a few people listening right now that they've been part of the organization for a while, and they've maybe felt like they've advocated for addressing some technical debt or some things that have been lingering for a while that they haven't heard, that they've heard, like not right now, we'll come back to that later, maybe a few too many times. And so they've stopped asking for time, or they just stop asking. So they just assume, oh, the organization doesn't care anymore. Or what advice could you offer them on how to maybe start trying to rethink that approach, aside from maybe trying to find a new job somewhere else?
I have found myself in that position in the past. Whenever I find myself in that position, I usually try to find another job. But I think that sometimes it's not that. So I would say that if you're not happy with the team, or you don't like the product, or the culture is not good for you, like you don't have work-life balance or anything, or if you feel that the work that you're doing is consuming you, or you just have so low motivation, then sure, find another job. If you still like the team and you still like the culture, I will say just go and tell your boss about it. Then just go straight to your CEO, just book a meeting with your CEO and tell them how you're feeling. This is what I would do. Get on a meeting with your CEO, tell them how you're feeling, and see if you can find something new in your company that excites you, or find a new motivation. I think it's understandable that motivation falters, and it's sort of, I don't know, like a sinus wave or something. And I think that on such cases, we definitely need to find motivation, because I find in myself, maybe that's not healthy or not, that's for my therapist to decide, but a lot of my happiness depends on how productive and happy I feel at my work. It's 8 hours of my day. It's half my waking hours, so it makes sense. So whenever I don't feel motivated or I don't like what I'm doing, I'm just really down, man. So try to fix that. Don't just sit there. This is what I'm saying.
That's some good advice, and and maybe seek some advice from your therapist as well, as I have in the past. Is there a non-tech, non-software book that you like to recommend to people that you work with to read?
Actually, I read a lot of books. I read all the time. If I don't read books, I'm miserable. My father also is a writer, so I grew up in books. One of my favorite books is Slaughterhouse Number 5 by Kurt Vonnegut. But there are other two books that I really, really like. One is the trilogy from Cixin Liu, The Three-Body Problem. I really love this trilogy. And also the Cryptonomicon. I really like it as well.
So that was a 3-body series?
Three-Body Problem. Yeah, it's 3 books. And the other is Cryptonomicon by Neil Stevenson, which is very good as well.
Nice. I'll include links to those for everybody in the show notes so they can pick up some new books if they're looking for some new literature to immerse themselves in. And where can people follow your work and connect with you online?
So I'm on Twitter, or X, or however you call it. My handle is Cybercity, so PSYBERCITY.
Excellent. I'll include those links will be in the show notes for everybody as well. Yes. And I also heard that maybe a few of your coworkers know what Oh My Z Shell is?
Oh, yes, definitely. So I asked today in Slack who uses Oh My Z Shell. And so Mike said he's using it a lot, and he says, thanks, Robby Russell, for getting me to learn shell scripting. This is what he says. Aww. And yeah, we have Caleb, Isaac, Ben, Colum, Patrick, Yuri, Raresh, Max, and ciao, all of them are using it. And some of my ex-colleagues are using it as well. Kostas and Dionysis, these are both Greeks. So, and Stelios, three Greeks. So they were so super excited that I met you. They were like, "You met a legend. Do you realize?" So yeah.
Well, I'm blushing. Thank you. Thank everybody listening or all the new people that you work with. Thanks for using Omezisha and appreciate the shout out there. That's nice of you. For everybody else listening, I did not plan like to do this. It was just she just wanted to make sure that I knew that her
Yeah,
coworkers were excited about it.
I
Um,
wanted to add this.
yes, I appreciate that. It's humbling. It's so wild that that project has reached so many people when all I wanted to do was convince a couple of my coworkers to use my configuration file. So I apologize, everybody. It is what it is. All right, with
Oh,
that,
and one last question. Sorry, one last
yes,
question. My friend Stelios asked, "What is your favorite theme?"
random. If you change it, I mean Robbie Russell, obviously, but
Yeah.
random. If you switch it to random, every time you open up a new terminal window, it'll be a different one, and so it's just complete
Ooh,
chaos. So it's a
okay.
good way to kind of see a wide variety of them. So, anyways, random is
Nice.
my backup option there. Well, it's been such a delight
Uh,
having you join us on Maintainable, Katerina. Thank you so much for stopping by to talk shop with us.
Thank you for having me.